We start with 17-year-old Alex Browning heading off on a senior trip to Paris with a bunch of his high school classmates, who all seem to be played by actors in their mid-20s because reasons. And here we meet the main characters, including Alex's best friend Todd Wagner, arch nemesis Carter and his girlfriend Terry, hot toddy French teacher Mrs. Luton, random student Billy, aka that Stifler bloke who was in all these kinds of films in the early noughties, and a super emo loner girl called Clear Rivers. And no, I'm not making that up. Anyway, already a nervous flyer, Alex starts seeing ominous omens everywhere. Like the airport boards displaying the word terminal all over the screens, and a weirdo culty guy directly handing him leaflets about the afterlife and shit. But he just shrugs and thinks,
"Nah, it'll be fine."
So once on board, horny sex pest Todd Wagner totally tries to get Alex not to swap seats with the two hot students who would prefer to sit together. And not beside said sex pest was apparently planning to titty fuck them over Greenland. And again, I'm not making this up. That's actually a line of dialogue in this film. So naturally, he does that chivalry thing and lets the two girls sit with each other. And then moves up beside his best buddy Toddy, who's now got to sit there and watch Stuart Little for the whole flight instead of getting fantasy tit wanks over random countries. Speaking of, things soon go tits up when Alex sits down and immediately breaks off a piece of furniture. But before he can complain about the shoddy workmanship on this multi-million-dollar piece of corporate transportation, the jet soon takes off. And after a little bit of turbulence, everything seems a-okay. But suddenly, said turbulence comes back with a vengeance and starts lobbing people out of the fucking windows. And Alex can only sit and watch as all his mates get deadied all around him, whilst his own face gets roasted worse than Madonna's current face in a sarcastic plot recap video. Anyway, turns out this was all a phony fakey premonition, and he wakes up on board the flight again where those two top toddy students were asking him to move seats and shit. So naturally, he freaks out worse than a Democrat in a church when he moves up to the seat in his vision and rips off the shoddy furniture again, but this time IRL. And gelling about how they're all about to die in a fiery inferno, he's promptly removed from the plane along with a few other poor sods who innocently get caught up in the carnage and who now ain't going to get to Paris and see all the lovely cultural enrichment what's going on over there. So after Todd calls and waits for their parents, Alex sits and explains to Mrs. Luton how he saw a little bit of turbulence totally bring down the plane in his mind, and then had a paranoid panic attack about it, which caused them all to miss out on their holidays and stuff. Lol, don't you just hate it when that happens? Naturally, obnoxious rival Carter, who hates his guts anyway, now hates his guts even more for ruining his romantic getaway with girlfriend Terry, whilst Billy and Claire just sit in baffled amusement listening to all this deranged waffle. When suddenly, the jet indeed explodes just like he said it would, and they just can't believe he was a bona fide Tyler Henry type what sees the future in shit. And before they can say, "You better buy us all a bunch of lottery tickets, son," Alex gets quizzed by the FBI, given he totally said that jet was going to explode and then it totally did because reasons. And although highly suspicious of the potential teenage terrorist who could have totally planted a bomb, given this was pre-9/11 and they weren't even checking people's shoes at that point, they totally let him go scot-free, also because reasons. So after dropping off a teenage girl in the pouring rain and not even pulling up next to her front door to see her home safely, Alex's parents try to comfort him, whilst he just cries in front of the local news report like a right cuck. Speaking of, a month or so later, and that Carter fella's in total denial that fate seems to be totally real, and arrogantly declares that he's the one what's in control of his life, and also that he ain't ever gonna die. Whilst a little later, Mrs. Luton tells him to sod off and all, because he creeps her out worse than Woody Allen on Bring Your Daughter to Work Day. Anyway, Todd then plans a trip with Alex in a few weeks, given they ain't seen each other in a while since his dad blames Alex for everything, whilst Clear is the only one to actually thank the scrawny guy what saved all their lives.
It's about damn time.
Anyway, later that night, Alex gets those strange ominous feelings again, whilst his buddy ends up slipping on some conveniently placed leaky fluid and soon gets strangled to death in a small bathtub. And just sensing something's wrong after a torn piece of paper with Todd's name on it literally lands in his fucking lap, Alex runs over to his house and is soon informed that his best buddy has only gone and Epsteined himself in the bathroom. But he doesn't think that's quite right, given said buddy was making plans to go on trips with him earlier that same day. So he later goes over to Claire's house to talk it over, where she just says, yeah, that's well weird, bro. But also, I have a major crush on you, especially after you saved my friggin' life. Because those kind of heroics totally give me a right raging lady boner. So they then break into the local morgue to try and find out the truth about what happened to their surprisingly clumsy and supposedly depressed deaded mate, where they're soon confronted by some rather morbid chocolate fella, who says that given there's evidence to show he was trying to pull at the wire, Toddy Boy clearly wasn't trying to top himself. And before you can say, well, he was a horny sex pest, so maybe he was just trying to do one of them autoerotic asphyxiation things, like what you read about on 4chan, and also in obituaries of CD celebrities and stuff. But he then starts ominously banging on about death, and reveals that the survivors who escaped that giant fuck-off plane explosion have only gone and disrupted that deaf fella's plan, so now he's super pissed and out to claim the lives of all those who were meant to die from the initial accident. Damn shit. Anyway, the next day, Alex and Claire are discussing their next move, and how they need to be spiritually open and watching for more signs and omens. And he indeed sees the more said signs and omens, and this time of a speeding bus reflected in a shop window, when suddenly, fate ends up gathering all the survivors in one spot, and before you can say, this'll end well, Alex and Carter soon get into another Barney, before Terry finally snaps and says she's totally moving on from all this death, destruction, utterly mental shit. But in a shocking twist, what no one could ever see coming, turns out the blonde bimbo, what just walked into the middle of a road without looking, totally then gets hit by a fucking bus.
Oh, that's gonna hurt!
And now convinced there's more to all this than mere random coincidence, Alex figures out that that deaf fella is probably real after all, and now out here reclaiming the survivors according to the order of their original intended demise on the plane. And now Todd and Terry are both brown bread, the next in line is going to be that top totty teacher bird what's totally preparing to move out of town, isn't she? And as she's packing up, she spots that gangly soy boy what's always around when people get killed in this town, creeping all over her front lawn. So naturally, she calls the feds on his ass. And after hilariously arriving in under 10 seconds flat, they soon take him into custody, where they then ask what on earth he's doing skulking around his teacher's gaff in the dead of night. And the best excuse he can offer is that he was just checking her tyre pressure free of charge in the pitch black. But because they've got less evidence than a corrupt prosecutor going after that orange bloke on bogus charges, they have to let him go again. But alas, he soon gets back to her house and finds her having fallen victim to a series of bizarre and farcical accidents. And he just makes it worse when he tries to help her and somehow ends up letting a nearby chair fall directly on top of a penetrating knife wound, which then kills her instantly. No! And now with his prints all over the murder weapon and also the floor, he tries to get the heck out of Dodge before the entire house explodes in a giant fireball. And that poor Billy kid just can't catch a break. Because every time he tries to go for a peaceful bike ride, he seems to see a person die horrifically in front of him. And before he can say, dude, where's my car already? Claire tells the snooping feds that she ain't seen that scrawny soy boy what keeps leaving death and destruction in his wake, so shut up about it already. Later, Claire finds her now fugitive crush hiding out on a small beach. And after whining on about her tragic backstory about how her dad was murdered when she was young and her mum then married some dick and totally abandoned her, she says he can hide out at her dead dad's cabin in the woods till all this blows over. So once the gang soon regroup and head on up there, a rather paranoid and messed up Carter just can't accept that he's next in line to be killed, so instead demands to die on his own terms, and soon starts recklessly speeding and running red lights, and she...
Not a great plan.
And after Alex sees yet another sign in the form of a torn seatbelt, Carter parks up on some train tracks to prove how much of a badass he is. But unfortunately, he immediately cuts out, and Alex soon has to save his ass from an oncoming train, which then tears his seatbelt, and thereby fulfills his earlier premonition again. Also unfortunately, this totally means that he's intervened in Death's order for a second time. So naturally, poor old Billy gets his noggin sliced off in Carter's place.
Damn!
The next day, and whilst hiding out in his floozy's dead dad's cabin, which he's also totally fortified like a stark raving paranoid lunatic, Alex soon survives an attempt on his life by that invisible deaf fella. Or so he thinks, because in another shocking twist, what no one could ever see coming, he suddenly recalls that he changed seats with those two classmates in his premonition, and was always meant to be sitting behind Claire, and thus soon realises that this whiny orphan stalker bird is actually next.
Oh shit, not good.
So he soon rushes over there to totally save his teeny bae, while she's busy getting attacked by the elements and also faulty wiring. And after taking refuge in her car, a loose power line traps her in the yard, and it looks like it's curtains for the desperate loner girl with a stupid name. But luckily, her scrawny cursed lover boy arrives, and soon gives her another raging lady boner by doing more heroics and self-sacrifice things. Then we cut to 6 months later, after that time he totally lifted an electrified cable with his bare hands and almost killed himself, and just to save a hot blonde girl he has zero chemistry with. And turns out the surviving trio have taken that trip to Paris after all, where the new friends soon toast to being alive. Unlike all their other pussy old friends, what couldn't even outsmart an invisible bloke what has to constantly orchestrate a series of convoluted coincidences to try and kill you. And they then boast about totally beating that naughty deaf fella once and for all. And we end with Alex browning his pants when he realises it's still not over, despite death seemingly having left them alone for 6 whole months because reasons. And because he intervened to save Claire, but no one intervened to save him, and he just happened to survive the power cable fiasco, it totally means that he's still next, isn't she? And after Carter saves Alex from a falling neon sign, and thereby being squashed flat in Natalie Portman's chest, and of course Prince Elrond's face, said Carter fella totally gets deaded off screen, as we then cut to black without learning the ultimate fate of the final 2 protagonists that we just spent the past 2 hours with. Ah, what satisfying writing. And that's it, that's the movie. Though my favourite part was realising that the lead actor in this film also played that stalker nutcase Stan fella in Eminem's classic music video back in the day. But anyway, that's a blot and that's a lot. Considering that bell thing so you don't miss any future recaps. Tell me if you like this franchise in the comments if you have time, and I'll see you in the next one.